Welcome to The Arthropologist. I'm Bill Wilson, the Arthropologist, and this is my son and business partner, Emil Wilson.
Howdy, guys. Excited to be guest hosting The Arthropologist for a second time.
Okay, and Emil is here today. He's going to be interviewing me about one of my professions, being a courtroom artist.
Okay, and let's start with that, one of your professions. I think what's really important to distinguish here is you are an artist. That is your profession.
Yes.
This is just one of the many genres, one of the many quivers in your bow. You're still an archer. You just have a lot of different quivers.
Right.
And, I think one of the things that's distinguished your career is the diversity of skill that you have for not just two-dimensional, but three-dimensional medium as well.
Yeah, I'm 62 years old, and I kind of come from old school illustration. A lot of artists today, they're very one-dimensional. They're really good at one particular genre, one particular medium, but old school illustrators they were good at a lot of things, and they were very diverse in their styles and in their approaches. And in my career, that's what I've enjoyed doing, but also to make a living, very often you have to be able to do a lot of different things. So being able to sculpt, being able to paint in many different mediums, draw in different mediums and different subjects has been a plus for me.
And on this particular one, we're talking about courtroom reporting, or courtroom,
Right.
Let's be specific, it's courtroom illustration work.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, we wouldn't call it reporting.
Well,
There's actually a court reporter that's...
Yeah, but I am actually reporting visually what's being seen.
And I guess you are getting access under press access.
Absolutely.
And so this is actually something, maybe someone in the comments can join in. A court reporter is the person who works for the court and actually is typing out everything. So even a journalist covering the federal courts or state courts, I don't know that they would be considered court reporters.
Yeah,
courtroom
that's right.
Journalists.
Yeah. So I guess I would be sort of I don't know what it's called. I honestly don't. And one of the reasons is that the profession of courtroom artist, that kind of died, I don't know, 18 or so years ago, whenever the courts or the legislatures decided it would be legal for cameras to go in, but it only applied to state and municipal courts. It does not apply to federal courts. So if you go into a federal court, there will be no cameras in there. Now, a caveat, sometimes, because I've actually seen it on some cases I've worked, where there would be there are cameras in there for appearances, arraignments or something, I'm not sure. But as far as the real court and the sentencing, no cameras allowed.
Well, and I think a lot of that changed up a little with COVID when you had people doing appearances via cameras and Zoom and all of that, so that there wasn't the issue of prisoner transport and cross-contamination from a sealed-off jail. So, you get pulled in to do these in federal courts because state court, they can photograph, they have video,
Right.
But you're pretty much the visual documentation. You've got people taking notes, but you're not even allowed to carry a cell phone in there, as I understand.
No, I'm not. That's what reminds me, I got to buy a pocket watch because it's very annoying. I'm sitting there and I don't know what time it is or how long we've been in there.
Of course, he wants a pocket watch, not a wrist watch.
The rules are very stringent, and like I say, I don't do this very often because there's not a whole lot of call for it. There used to be hundreds and hundreds across the nation, and now it's just very limited. There are a few that do it full time.
Well, I think a lot of that is when we talk about the legal system, so many of the court cases now are pled out. There's even the ones you've been dealing with. Have you ever illustrated an actual trial?
Uh, yes.
You okay?
Yes.
You have, because
have.
I even the one we're going to get to the specifics of this case and this trial in a minute, but all it was plea bargains, plea deals.
Yeah, and actually, it's some of this we've had to do by trial and error. The news outlet, I'll give a shout out to Jackson Jambalaya because that particular news organization has hired me a number of times, as well as WLBT. But I went into a couple of cases which were the plea deal at the beginning, and that goes fast. And we discovered that it just wasn't, there was no time for me to do anything. I literally, on one case, we went in and I sat down and I got my drawing stuff together, and the defendant stood up and the judge asked like 3 or 4 questions. Are you pleading? Yes, sir. You realize you're giving up your right to an appeal? Yes, sir. Okay, well then I will make my judgments later. Clink, or clunk down with the hammer. And that was it. And when I got out, the head of Jackson Jambalaya asked, well, what'd you get? And I said, nothing, because it was literally 5 minutes long. What we discovered was if we're not doing the full trial, then when the judge is actually giving his judgment as far as sentencing, the sentencings, that's what it is, that's where you really get some pretty good stuff, because the defendant and the trial lawyers, they will be facing the judge sometimes for 10 or 15 minutes, giving their plea and so forth, and that gives me a lot of time to get what I need to get.
So, yeah, talking about 15 minutes for a drawing, that's not a lot of time. And so I want to get to that, but let's start at the beginning.
Okay.
You know, when we talk about courtroom illustrations, it's the window into a federal courtroom, mm-hmm. with no cameras, with no microphones, no reporters. You're getting access to something that largely is a closed community. Unless you're a defendant or a lawyer, odds are you're not in a federal courtroom for much of anything.
Exactly.
So, talk us through the process. You're called up, and they say, we've got a court case that's a big enough deal. We want you illustrating it.
Right.
What do you do to get into a courtroom?
Well, the first thing is you have to get the judge's approval. Now, all of this is handled, I've actually handled it on one court docket, but for the most part, that's going to be handled by the news organization that's hiring me to do it.
So that's something that's interesting right there. You can't even, like if someone's watching and wants, how do I get to be a court reporter? You can't just walk in and practice in the courtroom.
No, I mean, you could if you were going into state or municipal courts, and I've thought about doing that because it's open to the public. You can just go in and sit there and sketch. I don't need that practice because I literally carry a sketchbook, a small sketchbook with me virtually everywhere I go, up to and including in my Bible. When I'm at church, I mean, I'm also sketching. And so I'm always sketching and keeping my eye and my hands coordinated for it. But yeah, if you're not doing something to practice, you're not going to be able to do it. But yeah, getting into court, the judge has to approve, because he or she reigns supreme. That's their territory, and you don't mess with them.
I've heard it said the closest thing to God on earth is a federal judge, and their courtroom.
Yes, and we can get to that later. There may be some that say, well, that almost sounds blasphemous. No, it's actually not. That's actually
It's pretty true.
It's a very clear description. You've got someone who literally can determine what's going to happen for the rest of your life. But so in my case, the head of either WLBT or Jackson Jambalaya would call the federal courthouse, get the judge's approval. Once the judge approves, then you go through the federal marshals. They have to approve as well. So whoever's the head of the marshal service, they had to send my information so that he could vet me and make sure I was who I said I was.
Make sure those sharp pencils aren't going to end up somewhere they shouldn't.
Exactly. They got to make sure that I'm not somebody that could cause a problem. Because one, you don't want anybody attacked or whatever, but number two, you don't want any case for appeal where somebody went in and did something that would deprive the defendant of their civil right to get a fair trial.
So a bad drawing might pollute the jury pool.
But there's then, even once I'm approved, then I've got to go and show what I'm carrying into that courtroom. And that can be an issue. When I first started, I wasn't familiar, and I wanted to bring in some stuff to sharpen my pencils with, and they wouldn't let me do it. And because normally an artist sharpens their pencils with an X-Acto knife. Well, that ain't happening.
Not in the court.
And some of the pencils I use really don't use, pencil sharpeners won't work. And so it took me a little while to figure it out, but if you don't know what a potato peeler looks like, look it up online. I literally carry a potato peeler into the court, and sometimes you'll see me over there whittling, and I'm whittling away at the wood. And
but even that is...
even that they wouldn't. There would be some cases, like for instance, and they have let me in with the small pencil sharpeners with little bitty blades, but I read about one woman who did some of the Al Qaeda courtroom, or when they were going in, and I guess it was a courtroom for them. They didn't even allow that. She went in with like a dozen or 2 dozen pre-sharpened pencils. A lot of courtroom artists that are left, they use or markers of some sort, something you don't have to sharpen. But yes, even a potato peeler, which would be almost impossible to kill somebody with, still doesn't matter.
I guarantee you an inmate could figure out a way.
They could figure out a way.
An inmate or a ninja, they could figure out a way.
Yeah. Yeah, and I actually had one, because I had like 4 different sharpeners for different size pencils, and one of the guys scanning my stuff, and they scan everything, just like in an airport. He said, "Mr. Wilson, do you have spent shells in here?" And it took me a second. It's like, no, he was seeing the little bitty blades, and he couldn't figure out what they were. I said, "Those are pencil sharpeners, little children's pencil sharpeners." He said, "Oh, I see that now. Okay." Now, I got in with that because I've been in there multiple times. But my first time in there, they wouldn't even let me bring pencil sharpeners. And
so it's about building a reputation and
a rapport
yeah.
with them. And those of you who are listening, I'm in my felt cowboy hat. I'm wearing a vest and a bow tie, and that's pretty much how I dress all the time. I'm not dressed up just for this show, except for the sports coat. This is what I wear all day long, even when I'm painting. But going in dressed like I do, most of the time people think I'm another lawyer.
Yeah, I was going to say, I am not a lawyer, but I do a lot of work around the courts, and I get access through back doors sometimes. And A, because they know me or just letting me in, but B, you look like an attorney, so you're just given attorney access sometimes, and you don't have any clue what's going on.
Yeah.
You just go.
And I'm carrying a briefcase with me. The briefcase holds my set of colored pencils and erasers, things like that. And then I've got another portfolio, which is a satchel type thing with handles that I carry my drawing board and the colored paper that I use. So no one has a clue that I'm not a lawyer until they see what I'm starting to do. And that leads up to, I now have very special access. If there's no one in the jury box, if there's not a jury in the jury box, then I have permission to go and sit in the jury box, because very often if you're sitting in the audience, you can't see anything. Everybody's back is to you, and you can't tell. And quick fun story, I did an Ponzi scheme, big Ponzi scheme trial. And it was so funny, the defendant walked in after walking through a gauntlet of reporters, probably a dozen cameras from CNN to local, all of them there filming him. He goes through all of that. He walks into the courtroom, looks up and sees me with my drawing pad, and he stops and just looks me in the eye for a second. And then, I kid you not, he turned completely around and walked backwards and sideways through the court, between the podium and all of that, to get to his seat so that I couldn't see him.
Yeah.
And his name is Jimmy, the guy that's head of Jackson Jambalaya. Jimmy asked me, he said, he looked, and what I had, the only drawing I had of this guy was a backward 3/4 look. And he said, that's the best you could do? I said, dude, he wouldn't let me see him. And the only reason I got that was because the angle I happened to be at, I had that back 3/4 when he was up testifying to the judge, and then he didn't care about me, and he had to pay attention to the judge. That's when Jimmy said, okay, I'm going to get you in that jury box, because it's okay, but we wanted the face. And I said, absolutely.
So here's the question. You have such a limited time with these subjects. Do you pull reference material beforehand? Are you looking at images online from news agencies of these people and prepping anything?
No. I tried that one time, or someone sent me a link and said, this is what these people look like. Well, sometimes 6 months later, when they're coming in to do this, the shots that were sent to me were either when they were a civilian, or and they weren't an inmate or a convict, or it was right after they were arraigned, and so half the time their heads are shaved and all this stuff, and they don't look anything like when they're coming into court with me. The other thing is, I mean, I've just gone in. I don't know who the lawyers are. I don't know who anybody is. And I've literally sat down, and when I'm in the jury box, very often witnesses, private detectives, federal marshals, just other people that are in the court, they'll be up there with me. And I'll lean over and say, please tell me, when you see the defense attorney, the prosecuting attorney, and the defendants, anybody that's important, point them out to me so I know. Because one time I started drawing somebody that looked really cool, and then someone came up and said, yeah, he's just one of the associate lawyers or something. He's really not that big in the case. It's like, oh. So I learned real quick, find out who it is so that you can get a good drawing of them.
But that is interesting to know, because I would have thought there'd be a lot more prep work, pre-sketching, because when you do events like weddings and things, you'll arrive early, you'll do pre-sketch work. before you paint it sometimes.
Yeah, well, you're not allowed in the courtroom until they unlock it.
Yeah.
And they don't unlock it they unlock it like X number of minutes before the judge gets there so that everyone else can get in there. But they're not going to let me in. I mean, not by myself.
You know, I think we've seen some of these drawings that get lavish, but those tend to be very recognizable or state issued, not so much federal.
Right. Well, there are some courtroom drawings that you'll see that, oh my gosh, I mean, there's just colonnades and all kinds of stuff going on. Well, one, they're in a beautiful facility, but number two, they're in there for days. And so they've got time to sit there and do all that background and then stick the people in it, or they'll do the people and then do the other stuff later.
But I think also you're being tasked very often with court is meeting at 10. We need all of this for the 4 o'clock news.
Oh.
And it's got to be scanned in and processed by the news agencies. So we're talking a project that you aren't allowed to start until 10 has to be completed by 2, and that's multiple drawings of multiple hearings throughout a single day.
Absolutely. I've literally walked, I mean, they'll shut down, everybody get out. So we have to leave. And I gather all my stuff together. I walk out of the building, and I have literally had reporters with their cameramen and say, "You got the drawings?" Yeah. They don't even want to scan them. Just pull it out, hold it up, and they will film it right there because they're trying to beat...
well, they're trying to beat each other.
They're trying to beat each other. And now the nice thing is, especially in federal court, if I've done it for, say, WLBT and Jackson Jambalaya, CNN's hungry. They want those drawings. And, you know, you got to work it out with them or pay me later, you know, hire me yourself. But, you know, everybody wants those drawings once they're done. But they are, at least the first visuals are paid for by those news outlets. So they're not allowed to use them until...
It's not like this is a freelance, like you're drawing and hoping somebody's going to buy it. You're commissioned by these organizations.
Right. And the other thing too, and this is for, you know, if you're thinking you might want to do this one day, they're not buying the originals. They're buying the right to use them on this news station this time, or, you know, in perpetuity or whatever. But the originals, those are mine.
And what do you do with those originals?
I sell those.
Of course.
I trade my pictures. I trade for other pictures of presidents, and the more the better. And lawyers and judges and other people in the court, they love these drawings because it is harkens back to old school court proceedings. It's also, you know, it's fine to have film of you being in court, but to have an actual painting or drawing, something that's tangible that you can frame and put on your wall beside your diplomas or your license as a lawyer, it's something that's very special, that means a lot to these people, not the least of which, if you're a lawyer and you've got something that's gone to federal court, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
It's a big deal, and it's usually a landmark decision, that win or lose, you've been involved in something really big. And so it's something that they really want. And I don't own but a couple of the ones I've done, because very quickly these attorneys and other people that have been involved, they put a lot of time, a lot of effort into this, and they want it as a memento of something special in their lives. And that's both prosecuting and defense attorneys. I've sold them to defense attorneys and prosecuting attorneys. So that's been really good.
Talk to me about some of the decisions you make with the materials, the paper, things like that. I know you're dealing with a limited amount of time to sharpen your pencils. You're also dealing with a limited amount of time to make the drawings. So you're using colored paper.
Right.
Talk to me about why you're using the materials you use.
Okay. Whenever you're doing sketching or plein air painting from life, speed is of the essence, especially if you're doing something like this where everybody's moving, nobody's posing for you. So you want your materials to do as much of the work for you as possible. I use, and historically people have used, toned paper, either a light to mid-tone gray, or oddly enough, a olive green. It's a pared down green, because it does complement flesh tones, and that's all black, white, doesn't matter. It really complements flesh tones. Well, the beauty of that is that I can literally make a few marks, put in a shadow, pop in a couple of highlights, all the midtones are done. So 3/4, actually more than half of my work is done if I do it right, because the paper itself is doing most of the work. And so that's very helpful. When I go out, I said I carry a sketchbook with me everywhere. I only carry markers, pens. So there's no pencil, there's no erasing. So it forces me to really watch and pay attention to what I'm doing and be bold and decisive. If I were really good and did this all the time, that's what I would carry into the courtroom. But even I'm not that good. I don't do it that much. So I've got my pencils and I've got my erasers. And then a lot of it is just, I think the papers are about 11 by 17. You can't get really, really huge. It's just too unwieldy. The court has always been very kind to me and allowed me 2 seats in the box, because I'll be sitting there, but then I've got a case, a zipper case that holds like 117 pencils that lays open beside me, where I've got access to all these colored pencils. I've got 3 or 4 erasers, 3 or 4 sharpeners. I've got a sack, garbage bag that sits beside me, so that if I'm using my potato peeler, I can do the shavings into that. So I'm ready to go. I've sort of surrounded myself with my little nest of materials, and then it's boogie time. You got to go, and I have to watch myself, because you get in, you get to working, and I literally have to catch myself. Stop grinding your teeth. Stop doing that, because I'll get music looped in my head, and it's sort of like the old Lone Ranger William Tell overture, and you just get hyped up because you got to go, you got to go, you got to go, and I'll find myself gritting my teeth and grinding my teeth and doing things that don't help, and so I have to. As I'm working, I'm doing all these breathing techniques to slow down, think about what you're, and also at the beginning, there's that saying, you fake it till you make it. At first, people think, oh, you're so confident in everything, and for the most part I am. I know it's going to work out, but at the beginning, you can't do this. You're just a failure. Especially you start your drawing and you don't have that lightness yet, and you're just beating yourself up. You don't know what you're doing. You're just stupid. But then all of a sudden, and I've been doing this for 36 years, so I know it's going to come. All of a sudden, I make a mark, and it's like, that's right. That actually is starting to look like her nose. If I do this, that's the forehead. Okay, I can do this. And then I just, I get faster and faster as I think slower and slower, there's a poster that used to be around, the hurrier I get, the hurrier I try, the slower I get, or something like that. And it's the opposite. The more you slow down, kind of get in that zone, then all of a sudden things just start clicking, and it works out.
So it sounds like the imposter syndrome never goes away.
No.
Especially, and again, this is such a time-sensitive thing. Someone walks into a courtroom, you've got just a few minutes, and then there's a news source sitting there saying, "Give us the drawing right now."
Oh, yeah, and you will see things like, on my paper, white women turn into black men, or Asian men turn into black women. And what happens is someone will come out and they'll be in a position where I can draw them, and they don't stay but a second or two, and deep down, some of these people I know, okay, they're just shifting positions, I'll get them later. And so I just move on the page and sketch somebody else. But there are some people, no. They were there and they ain't gonna be back.
So you'll start drawing one person, and then they leave, and another person comes in, and you just take that drawing and convert it into...
Very possibly, very possibly. Sometimes, I'll try to erase it down a little bit, but if it's at all salvageable, and it's not too advanced, then oh yeah. Because so much work's already been done, if a few marks can move, literally turning a white woman into a black man, or an Asian man into a black woman, absolutely. You just shift some things around. Everything is about saving time. If you've already done part of it, I'll give you a perfect example. In the last case I did, the Goon Squad, one of the defendants, I didn't know what I was going to get from him. So he was sitting at his table with his attorney, and so I start sketching him. Well, then he stands up 10 minutes, 15 minutes later, after I've already drawn a bunch of other people. He stands up in front of the judge. Well, this is a great look. I mean, the way his attorney and actually two attorneys and him, well, I didn't think I'd have enough time to redraw him and put his attorneys in. So I took the drawing of him seated, and I very quickly started shifting his anatomy. Now, one of the things that you have to keep in mind, a very great illustrator that I've watched a lot of his YouTube videos, he talks about, in art there are three things you paint. You paint what you see, you paint what you know, and you paint what you want to see. I paint what I see. I'm painting what I'm looking at, but also paint what I know. And I've studied anatomy and comparative anatomy quite extensively, so I can draw a human figure out of my head and it'd be very accurate. So I can shift anatomy around and make things fit. But then there's also paint what you want to see. Even if that stance isn't exactly right, I'll change it up a little bit to make it all work. And a lot of it's just like things get covered up. Someone will step in front of another person, cover up most of their body. I have a general idea, I remember how they look, but then I just have to go from off of what I know from my own knowledge of the 7 laws of folds. I won't go into it, but there are 7 laws of how folds fall in your clothing. Well, if you know them, you can make that stuff up plausibly and not just look silly.
Well, and talking about studying anatomy, talking about studying the 7 laws of folds, like all of those academic exercises really add up to something like this. You can't paint a guy in a courtroom in 10 minutes or less unless you have painted fabric so many times that you know where it's going to fold when his jumpsuit is crinkled versus straight versus however.
Yes. And there's so many other things. I studied caricatures, and I've done hundreds and hundreds of caricatures, and a lot of that teaches you to really focus on certain facial features that you'll exaggerate, and even if the rest isn't right, it still looks like that person because that one feature or two features really is what is the defining look for that person. And so even though my work doesn't look like a caricature in the courtroom, I'm still using that base of knowledge to accentuate certain characteristics and make it look like them. And I also have to be under the realization that not all these drawings are going to look like the people. Some of them do. Some of them are absolutely fantastic. I mean, I'll pat myself on the back. I did a great job. Some of them, not really. I mean, they're close, but not really. And it's just because you can't be on every second. Sometimes they're just moving too fast. There's just a lot going on, and not every single one's going to be perfect. But you do the best you can, and you realize that not everything's going to be perfect. And you do, if you're ever thinking about doing this, you have to realize you are on stage. Even though I make sure I don't do anything to draw attention to myself.
Somebody's looking at you.
Everybody's looking at me.
Yeah.
The judge, all the lawyers, everybody in that courtroom, they're looking over eventually because everybody's just looking around. And then they see this one guy with a board in front of him and his hand is going all over the place and he's looking up and down, up and down. And they're going, oh my gosh, that's a courtroom artist. Oh, that is so cool. And I'm fully aware that, because afterwards I'll have marshals and lawyers and witnesses that'll look and go, I was watching you the whole time. I watched you draw so-and-so and I just watched it come from the blank paper.
You're more interesting than the life sentence being handed down.
Yeah, and the thing is, if that's in the back of your mind, you just have to realize, you know what? It is what it is. And I know when I sit down, there's probably 24 eyes that are watching every move I make. And that's where at the beginning, that whole imposter syndrome, you're sitting there going, everybody's watching me and I'm failing. I can't do this. Oh, I wish I was home. I wish I was in the defendant's place. This is horrible. And then it starts clicking and you get your confidence and you move on. But certainly there are a lot of artists that most artists could not handle this because there's the pressure. One, you're working for a news outlet and you're trying to do a good job for them. Number two, you're in a very volatile situation. Number three, you are being watched very closely. And if you fail, you're failing spectacularly in front of a lot of people. So,
and it seems like, even though you've been doing this for a while, it's all of the years of doing different stuff, doing caricature, doing still life fabric, doing anatomy work. All of that is what it took to get you to a place where you could actually be doing this.
yes, and I gained a lot of confidence just doing painting cars at shows where people are banging into my easel, kids are touching my paper going, oh look, that's a drawing, is that wet? And you just deal with it, you move on. So yeah, it's a culmination of many years of experience and practice. And so when people ask me, well, what are you thinking about when all this is going on? I do think about the case some, but what you have to keep in mind is that when I come in, I haven't been through this case. I don't really know anything about this case. I don't know if the defendant is guilty, and I do know that if they've been found guilty or whatever, but I don't know if they're really guilty. I don't know if I'm going into a case where this person was railroaded, this person, because that happens. You know, we see cases all the time where someone gets sentenced and then they're exonerated years later, or they pled to a different sentence to help one of their co-defendants. And so there's lots going on.
Yeah, it's one thing even to have a passing news knowledge. It's another thing to be one of the attorneys or to be enmeshed in.
Yes, and the thing is, I'm not there to necessarily, I'm not there to make a judgment on anybody, even if what the accused is convicted of is a terrible crime. Again, I don't know all the facts, and I'm not there to make any sort of a judgment. I'm there to record. And I want to talk about a couple things on that. Number one, when I'm recording, I'm focused like a laser, not just on getting a likeness, but getting the feel of what's going on. I did one defendant, and I mean, this Goon Squad, there was 6 of them.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about the nature of this case and some of the others that you've done.
Let's do this Goon Squad.
Yeah.
It was, I believe, 6 defendants. They were accused of some brutal treatment of someone that they had arrested and detained.
So let's give a little background on that story,
Okay.
by the way. This was 5 Rankin County Sheriff's deputies and 1 police officer from a different district
Okay.
that had a documented series of abuses in multiple cases that all basically raised to a pinnacle in this one case in which they went in without a warrant and did some pretty brutal things to scare a guy away from a neighborhood, and it was a pretty brutal case. And these guys were known for their brutality. They were known colloquially, even before this case, as the Goon Squad.
Right.
They were 6 law enforcement officers that you did not ever want to cross paths with.
Yes. And a couple of things on that. First of all, when I was drawing these guys, trying to capture the mood and the feel, not just the likeness, but the mood and the feel, some of these guys, they were like the proverbial deer in the headlights. I mean, here another one. A freight train's coming. When you said earlier the closest thing you're going to be to meeting God is a federal judge or standing in front of a federal judge, there you go. Because these guys are standing there knowing that they could spend 10 years, 20, 40 years of their life, and it's all up to this judge. And there ain't no appeal, because since they pled guilty, they waived their right to an appeal, so they've just thrown themselves on the mercy of the court. They know they're going to get a long time, but they don't know how long.
I think on this, the shortest sentence was 10 years.
It may have
And
been.
the longest was over 30. Did it hit 40?
It was like 39 years, yeah, so it was real close. And one guy, I've actually watched real bullfights. And near the end, bulls are so tired, their jaw is just hanging down. They're so tired they can't even just hold their mouth closed. This guy looked like that. He reminded me of these bulls that the end is here and they can barely hold themselves up. He knew that freight train was getting ready to run over him. And I was doing everything I could to try and capture that, and that's body language. It's not just the face, it's how are the shoulders tilting, rolling forward, just everything about how they're doing. And so, it's important to me to try to catch that. On the flip side, earlier I said I'm not there to make a judgment. And that's because, again, I don't know everything about all these people, and I don't necessarily want to delve real deep into this, but in this particular situation, we weren't dealing with a choir boy on his way from church to feed his elderly grandmother, the victims, although they did not deserve what they got at all, I'm not condoning what happened to them at all. That being said, those defendants, those were not nice people. You do not want them to move into your neighborhood. They were scary, scary people. And a lot of this,
And you're saying that having sat in the courtroom, like, you could tell those.
Well, there was some of that, but one of the most abused people, he didn't show up until later. The first couple of trials or pleas I did, his statements were read. And so it was his attorneys reading it. Well, I didn't know anything about this person until I found out later that, as I understand, these defendants had multiple arrest records. And again, this is not to condone anything that was done to them, but how much compassion do you have when you find out that this person is, well, not a whole lot different than the people that were their abusers? And so that's where I just try not to judge any of them. I just do my job.
And in the end, you don't know the details. You don't know how egregious some of the guilty or some of the not guilty were, and so it's just about documentation.
Exactly, and that's all I can do. Without going on a rabbit trail, almost 40 years ago, I worked for the Mississippi Highway Patrol. I worked in a forensic lab, and lots of terrible stuff would come through my darkroom. Well, again, I'm not making judgments on victims or on the accused, because all I've got is this set of evidence, and I'm treating it like I would anything else. And you can find out later that the person you thought, oh, that's a nasty person. No, actually, that was a good person, and vice versa. So the courts have made their decision, and that's not up for me to decide. I'm there to make my little contribution.
But these are highly emotional proceedings, always.
Yes.
And how are you distancing yourself and not getting emotionally involved, either with the victim or the defendant or the
Some of it is, like I was talking about earlier, the imposter syndrome, where you're just trying to do this and get your job right. So you're so involved in that, you're barely aware of what's going on. But there are times I had to catch myself. One of the victim's father stood up, and he started describing, he was doing his victim impact statement. And whether I liked the victim or not, one way or another, I related to the father. Because you're my son, you're 39 years old, one of the victims was about that age. And so this father describing the horrible things that were done to this man, all of a sudden, as a father, I started feeling empathy. And I actually started feeling tears welling up in my eyes, thinking, oh my gosh, what would it be like for me thinking about that happening to you?
Well, because
I had to cut that out.
These are human beings, both.
Exactly.
No matter how innocent a victim is, no matter how egregious an accused or a defendant is, they're still human beings.
Exactly. And so that's where I had to literally in my head just say, cut that out. Draw. Is that nose right? Is that face right? What? Just literally going through sort of a litany. That's why they don't allow surgeons to work on their own children and stuff like that.
Well, and it gives you a lot of respect for everyone from law enforcement to AMR, firefighters, the judge.
Absolutely.
The judge can't get emotionally involved.
Absolutely. And I will tell you, I have gone home from these cases very often, and either I feel like I need a bath, or I feel like I've just been in something dirty and nasty, and mentally it's very draining. There is a reason why police officers are some of the highest suicides in the world, or at least in this country. It's because they deal with this kind of tragedy all the time. And I get a little taste of it when I'm sitting there and I'm listening to testimony of people who were brutally treated. And afterwards, again, it's just like no one, I don't care how bad they were, I don't care if they were a Nazi, I don't care if they were a biker, I don't care, they don't deserve to be treated that way. And you know, you go home and it's just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I was in the middle of this. It's like swimming in a sewer. It's terrible. But the other thing that it's sort of a segue, people have asked me, now that there are cameras in the courtroom, are courtroom artists perfunctory? Do we really need them? And my first thought was, you know what, I may be 62, but I'm up with all the technology, and I like watching courtroom proceedings and stuff like that when I'm in the studio. But I will tell you, I witnessed firsthand just how important not having cameras in the courtroom were when I was there at this last trial, because there was a lot of emotion. The people, members of the family and some of the people in their community were very charged up, and I could tell a lot of them, they were looking for a fight. They wanted to show out. Not having a camera to show off to dialed that energy back.
Well, because that's a big debate about cameras in the courtroom.
Yeah.
Does it contribute to government transparency, or does it take what should be a legal justice is blind proceeding and turn it into a theatric event?
And the answer to that is yes, on both. Yes, it does help with government transparency. I will tell you that sitting in the courtroom, I have listened to both prosecuting and defense attorneys play some kind of dirty tricks, do some things that trying to get some evidence in that they had already agreed couldn't come in, and then they snuck it in, but then when the opposing side started doing the same thing, then all of a sudden they cry foul. And so you get to see that. But the other thing is, this could have turned into a zoo really quickly. When there were victim impact statements throughout the proceedings, you start hearing people in the audience begin to make comments. Mm-hmm, that's right. That's terrible. Well, you're not supposed to do that, period. Later, one of the bailiffs actually admonished everybody and said, look, we're going to have to keep everything cool, so let's don't do that. But there was one time where, and I think it was the father of one of the victims, he started getting worked up. He started getting real emotional. And the more he ramped up, the more some people in the audience would, that's right, that's terrible. Well, then that'd ramp him up some more. And it just kept climbing and climbing, and his voice got to raising. And eventually, actually the judge had to admonish him and say, I'm totally sympathetic with you, but you have to, because he was saying, you know, I can't believe the defense attorneys are even here. How could you defend these people? If it was up to me, I'd go out in the parking lot and whip your butt, that kind of stuff. Well, they took it and everything, but the judge actually said, look, I understand this is a terrible experience for you, but you have to understand that, and I'm saying this for the audience, this is a legal proceeding. Everyone deserves their day in court, regardless of what they're accused of. These people had to do this 6 times because there were 6 defendants. The next day when I came in, the father had to do his same thing again, and he apologized. He said, yesterday I kind of made a threat and stuff, and I'm sorry, I didn't really mean that. And nobody took him to task for that. But that indicated to me, if there had been cameras there, oh my gosh, it would have been a zoo.
And that would have been the report on the news
Absolutely,
that night.
absolutely. Yeah. And there needs to be room for people to, I can't think of the term, you might help me, but exclamatory. An exclamatory statement, you know, where someone gets so worked up, you know, I'll kick your butt later. Is that just exclamatory, or is that a real, true threat? And this was not a true and a real threat. He was just
angry. He was upset,
angry, and he
rightfully
had a right
so.
to be.
Yeah.
But he had a whole mass of people that were already worked up, and it would have been real easy. There's no question. If cameras had been in there, there would have been a few people who would have shown out so that A, they could get their day in court, their 5 minutes of fame, and B, you know, feeling like they're doing their part to help the prosecution. So,
and on both sides.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
on both sides. So this just happened to be where it was overwhelmingly the defense's people were in the courtroom. My first reaction when I was asked this question was, you know, probably it's better if we do go on and let cameras in, but I've rethought that, and I think that there are a lot of cases that probably it shouldn't be, especially during the proceedings themselves, because this was a done deal.
Right.
The dirty little secret is, yeah, the victims get up and give their victim impact statement. It doesn't make any impact to the judge. It may to the rest of the world, but the judge, they've already made their decision.
Because the judge is handing down the decision that day.
Yeah.
Even with the victim impact statement and all
Absolutely.
that.
It's already written down. Now,
It's really
something
more about
could happen.
Well, it's more about documenting.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And
Yeah.
there are cases, I mean, I've watched them where the judge was going to hand down one sentence, and it's like, are you going to be that disrespectful and you're going to do that? I tell you what, I'm just going to double your sentence. But for the most part, it's a done deal. And the judge isn't learning anything he doesn't already know. But that's not to say this is for show. It's not for show.
It's for records.
It's for record.
Yeah.
And it's to give that. Those victims deserve the right to give their victim impact statement. And the defendants, they have that right, that there's that one last hope that something could happen to get them.
And it was interesting. Again, you know, we're not privy to evidence. We're not here to comment on anything. But I remember one thing that stood out to me in this was one of the defendants said, yeah, I did all of those things, but I didn't do that. And
yes.
I mean, again, I'm distant from this. I don't have any dog in the fight except justice as a whole, but I haven't seen that happen in at least none of the cases you've been involved with, where a defendant said, "Oh yeah."
Oh no,
But,
it did in one of these Goon Squads.
Well, that's what I was talking
Yeah.
about. Is in this Goon Squad one.
Yes.
And
Yes.
you know, it's
and again, being fair with everybody, the prosecuting attorney stood up and said, yeah, you're claiming that now, but you pled guilty to that. Well, folks, here's the dirty little secret. Many times defendants plead guilty to something in order to have other charges dropped or merged together, a lot of things.
In a federal case, you get credit for every step of the way saving the federal government time.
Yeah.
So if you plead guilty without ever reviewing the documents, really, then you're saving the federal government time and investigative costs, so you get credit towards your sentencing.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah, and so, yeah, you say, well, I would never plead guilty to something I didn't do. Oh, really? If someone said, plead guilty to this that you didn't do, and you're going to get 5 years, or don't plead guilty and get found guilty anyway, and you get 25 years. That's what a lot of these people face.
and that's where a case like this, or any case, it is important to have victim impact statements go in the record, have the
Yep.
defense statements go in the record, even if they're pleading guilty to everything, they have the opportunity to say, well, I'm amending it, I'm allowing it to go in, but I want to add to.
Right.
And then having the opportunity for the defendants to address the victims as well.
Yeah, and it was funny, I was talking to one of the attorneys. I don't really talk to him much about the cases. It's not my place, but weeks or sometimes years later, I might meet him and talk to him. And I actually did talk to one of the attorneys. It was after everything was done, and we were talking about some stuff, and I said, I saw 4 of the 6. I got sick, and so I couldn't do the last 2 defendants. But I said, of the 4, one of them I felt like was truly a broken man and was really genuinely sorry for what he had done. The other 3, I'm not so sure they aren't sorry they got caught. And he said, you are a very good judge of character, because that's exactly right. The man you're talking about, he was absolutely devastated and broken over what he had done, and he truly regretted what he had done. The others, no, I think they were just sorry they got caught. Now, again, that's that attorney's opinion as well, but that's where, even, you're in the court, you can't always read these people. Some people you look and go, oh, bless their heart, they seem like that's a terrible thing. And then later you find out, no, that was a good act. They were acting. And then other people, they'll say, well, they showed no emotion. Well, again, when you've got a train getting ready to run over you, shock is about all you can sometimes muster up. So you can't always judge these people and say, well, they're not truly showing remorse. Yes and no.
They're just in shock.
They're just in shock. I mean, they're getting ready to see their lives turned upside down. And what's interesting is, I did not know this until maybe it was you that pointed it out. I covered a case, a horrible, dragging death case, where a police officer, or was he a police
No,
officer?
these were just kind of some random drunk
guys chained a man to the back of their truck and drug him down the road until he died.
And really did it for sport.
And did it for sport. I covered that case and did not realize that was the uncle. One of those men was the uncle of one of the defendants.
Yeah, uncle, cousin. There's a relationship.
I think it was the uncle. I think he was quite a bit older.
And that got a lot of news. That
got
connection.
A lot of news. So I've covered some, like I say, Ponzi scheme, fraud schemes. I've covered some pretty brutal, terrible stuff. And I'll be honest, I do it for the money. I do not go into these court cases because I like doing it. Afterwards, it is psychologically draining, because you're in there with the victims. What was done to them is so horrific that I cannot imagine, not every day of your life just dwelling on it and being scarred. The victim, the families of the victim, knowing that happened to your loved one. But then on the flip side, again, for those who are listening, this is my son. He's 39 years old. that's roughly the age of most of these defendants. And they've got children. And I got grandbabies. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, if my 39-year-old son were going to jail for a minimum of 20 years, that means my grandbabies will be in their 20s before they see their dad again. I'm 62. He'll be my age when he gets out. I will be 82. So and the one guy got 39 years. Now, I did talk to a prosecutor later, and he said, you know, there's usually 80%. So
Right.
he won't serve for full. Okay, so he serves 32, but still 32 years. 32 plus 39 is 71.
Yeah.
So you're 70. That's 9 years older than I am now.
And like that's the thing is, in all of these cases, there were families on both sides. The accused, the convicted, their families are being torn apart.
Absolutely.
The defense's families are being torn apart. The abused victims. The victims' families being torn apart. Everybody is highly emotional, and rightfully so.
Everybody's a loser. There's
Yeah.
no winner. There's no positive. There's no upside. It's just all bad. And the best you can do is you're taking these people that did it, and A, you're getting them away from society so they can't do it again, and B, they're being punished. But, oh, and I did want to put this in about the punishment. When people say, again, what's going through your mind? I'll tell you, one of the things that was going through my mind this whole time was the whole thing about facing God. I've had people, I am a Christian, and people ask me, why are you so bent on sharing the gospel? And it's because we really believe that we are all sinners in the eyes of a holy God, and that one day we will face God, and we're either going to go, hey, look at all the wonderful things I did, which the Bible says your deeds are like filthy rags, so God ain't interested. Without the blood of Christ, you're facing that judge with just what you've done. And I could not get it out of my mind. Oh my gosh. One day we're all going to meet the eternal judge. And it was very sobering for me as a Christian. And so you may not believe this, and okay, but again, that's one of the things going through my mind the whole time is, this is real. These people are getting ready to basically lose their lives. And I, as a Christian, it's incumbent on me to share the gospel, because there's a world facing that for eternity. So I put that in strictly because when someone asks, like you did earlier, how do you not get emotionally attached? Well, some of it is things like that are going through my mind, that, you know, there's other broader implications. I've got the technical aspects of the drawing, so there's a lot going through my mind that can distract me from getting too tied up with the case itself.